The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Olivia Blackwood's last hope died with it. The small town of Jackson, Wyoming had not been kind to her since her arrival 3 months ago in the autumn of 1878. Now, as winter's cruel grip tightened around the town, she found herself huddled by the dying embers of a campfire on the outskirts. Everything she owned reduced to the tattered dress on her back, and the wedding ring she couldn't bear to part with, not even for food. Olivia shivered violently, pulling her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. The temperature had dropped precipitously after sunset, and she knew she wouldn't survive the night without shelter. The meager flames offered little warmth, and her stomach twisted with hunger so intense it felt like her insides were collapsing. "Madam, you all right out here?" the deep voice startled her. Olivia looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his stance was non-threatening, one hand holding the reins of a chestnut mare, the other extended slightly toward her. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. The stranger stepped closer, and the fading firelight revealed a weathered face with kind eyes. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jaw partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. His clothes were dusty, but well kept, the unmistakable attire of a cowboy. "No disrespect intended, but you don't look fine." He crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Ethan Quinn. I work at the Rockingham Ranch about 5 miles east." Olivia didn't respond. Experience had taught her that men rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Ethan seemed to read her thoughts. "I'm not looking for trouble, madam. Just seems wrong to leave someone out here with the temperature dropping like it is." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Least I can do is offer you this." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a hunk of bread and a small piece of cheese. Her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl, but still, she hesitated. "Take it," he said gently, placing the food on a flat rock between them. "There's plenty more where that came from." With trembling hands, Olivia reached for the bread. She forced herself to eat slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to devour it. Ethan settled on a log across from her, feeding a few sticks into the dying fire. "Way I see it, you've got 2 choices. You can stay out here and freeze, or you can come back to the ranch with me. There's a small cabin that needs some fixing up, but it's got a solid roof and a good stove." Olivia swallowed the last of the bread. "Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Ethan said simply. He gestured at the empty space around her. "You sat by the fire with nothing left. That doesn't mean you don't belong somewhere." Their eyes met across the flames, and something in his steady gaze made Olivia want to trust him. But trust had cost her everything before. "What would be expected of me?" she asked carefully. "Nothing improper if that's your concern," Ethan replied immediately. "The ranch needs help. Cook's getting on in years, and the place could use a woman's touch. It's honest work for fair pay." Olivia weighed her options, which weren't many. Death by freezing or starvation versus taking a chance on this stranger. "My name is Olivia Benton," she finally said, "and I accept your offer." Ethan nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Best decision you could make with winter coming on." "Can you ride?" When she nodded, he helped her onto his horse, then took the reins and began leading them east. As Jackson disappeared behind them, Olivia felt a curious mixture of fear and something else she hadn't experienced in months' hope. The Rockingham Ranch materialized out of the darkness like a mirage, a sprawling main house with a broad porch, several outbuildings, and a large barn. Light spilled from the windows, a beacon in the cold night. "Mr. Mason runs this place," Ethan explained as they approached. "He's a fair employer. Doesn't ask too many questions about where folks come from, only cares about the work they do." He helped Olivia dismount near the barn, then led her toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings. This was the foreman's place before he got married and built a bigger house. "It needs work, but it'll keep you warm tonight." Ethan pushed open the door, struck a match, and lit an oil lamp hanging by the entrance. The cabin was dusty but solidly built, a single room with a small stove, a bed frame with a bare mattress, a table, and 2 chairs. "I'll bring you some blankets and firewood," he said, stepping back outside. "And I'll let Mrs. Hoffman know we've got another mouth to feed. She'll be pleased to have help in the kitchen." True to his word, Ethan returned shortly with an armload of blankets, kindling, and several logs. He efficiently built a fire in the stove, then placed a bucket of water and a bar of soap on the table. "There's a wash house behind the main house, but this'll do for tonight," he said. "I'll come for you in the morning, introduce you to everyone." As he turned to leave, Olivia found her voice. "Mr. Quinn," she called softly. When he paused in the doorway, she continued, "Thank you. I won't forget this kindness." His expression softened. "Get some rest, Mrs. Benton. Things'll look better in the morning." After he left, Olivia washed as best she could with the cold water, then curled up on the mattress under the heavy blankets. Despite her lingering fears, exhaustion claimed her quickly, and she fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. Morning brought a tentative knock at her door. Olivia was already awake, having risen with the first gray light of dawn. She'd straightened the cabin as best she could, folded the blankets neatly, and was attempting to smooth the wrinkles from her dress when Ethan arrived with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of food. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the breakfast on the table. "Mrs. Hoffman's expecting you, but I told her you'd need time to get settled." The plate held scrambled eggs, bacon, and a thick slice of bread slathered with butter and honey. Olivia's eyes widened at the feast, more food than she'd seen in one place for months. "This is too much," she protested weakly, though her stomach disagreed loudly. "Eat what you can," Ethan encouraged. "You'll need your strength. Ranch work isn't easy." As Olivia ate, Ethan leaned against the doorframe, respectfully averting his eyes. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly, tall and lean, with broad shoulders and strong hands that spoke of years of hard work. His sandy brown hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and his eyes were a clear, steady blue. "Mr. Mason wants to meet you," Ethan said when she'd finished, "and Mrs. Hoffman is eager for help. Ranch hands are coming in for lunch in a few hours." Olivia nodded, smoothing her hair self-consciously. "I must look a fright." Ethan's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were kind. "Mrs. Hoffman mentioned she might have some clothes that would fit you. Her daughter left some things behind when she married and moved to Cheyenne." He escorted her to the main house, a 2-story structure that, while not ostentatious, spoke of prosperity. Inside, they found Harold Mason, the ranch owner. In his study, a barrel-chested man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and a neatly trimmed beard. "So you're the woman Quinn found half frozen," Mason said bluntly, looking her up and down. "You know anything about ranch life?" "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," Olivia answered truthfully. "I can cook, clean, mend, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Mason nodded approvingly. "Good. We've got 20 men to feed, and this place has been without a proper housekeeper since my wife passed last spring. Mrs. Hoffman does her best, but she's getting on in years." He named a modest salary, less than a man would make, but fair for a woman's position and including room and board. "One more thing," Mason added as she turned to leave. "I run a respectable establishment. Whatever brought you to that campfire last night is your business, but I won't have trouble brought to my doorstep. Are we clear?" "Yes, sir. No trouble will follow me," Olivia assured him, hoping it was true. In the kitchen, she met Mrs. Hoffman, a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands. The older woman clucked sympathetically at Olivia's appearance and immediately set about finding her suitable clothes. "Poor thing, your skin and bones," she fussed, holding up a dress against Olivia's frame. "But nothing a few good meals won't fix. My Hannah was about your size before she married. These should do until we can get fabric for new ones." By midday, Olivia was transformed. Dressed in a simple but clean blue calico dress, her dark hair washed and braided, she worked alongside Mrs. Hoffman preparing lunch for the ranch hands. The kitchen was warm and well-stocked, the work familiar enough that Olivia fell into an easy rhythm. When the men filed in, dusty and hungry, Olivia kept her eyes downcast, serving plates efficiently but avoiding conversation. She felt their curious glances, but was grateful when Mrs. Hoffman fielded their questions with practiced ease. Ethan came in last, hanging his hat by the door. When Olivia served him, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt an unexpected warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen fire. "Settling in all right?" he asked quietly. "Yes, thank you again for bringing me here." "You're doing us the favor," he replied. "Mrs. Hoffman's been overworked for months." That first day established a pattern that would carry Olivia through the next weeks. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning the main house, afternoons cooking and baking, and evenings mending clothes or linens. The work was hard but satisfying, and slowly she began to feel useful again. The cabin became her sanctuary. With Mrs. Hoffman's help, she added small touches: curtains made from fabric scraps, a braided rug by the bed, dried flowers in a tin can on the table. Ethan brought her a rocking chair he'd repaired, and Mason provided an advance on her wages so she could purchase essentials in town. Gradually, Olivia allowed herself to relax into the routine of ranch life. The men treated her with respectful distance, Mrs. Hoffman became a motherly presence, and Mason proved to be a fair if gruff employer. And then there was Ethan. He made a point to check on her daily, often bringing small gifts: a handful of late wildflowers, a book from Mason's library, a piece of wood he'd carved into a small horse. Their conversations were brief but increasingly comfortable, and Olivia found herself looking forward to his visits. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Olivia was sitting on her cabin steps, watching the sunset, when Ethan appeared with his guitar. "Mind some company?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. When she nodded, he settled next to her and began to play, his fingers moving deftly over the strings. The melody was sweet and melancholy, filling the quiet evening air. "That's beautiful," Olivia said when he finished. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mother taught me," Ethan replied, a hint of sadness in his voice. "She played in church back in Pennsylvania." "How did you end up in Wyoming?" Ethan's fingers absently strummed the strings. "Came west after the war. Seemed like a place a man could start fresh, you know?" He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you to Jackson?" Olivia tensed. She'd managed to avoid personal questions thus far, but something about the gentle dusk and Ethan's unassuming presence made her want to share a piece of her truth. "I was married," she said finally, twisting the simple gold band she still wore. "My husband, James, heard there was work in the mines. We came from Missouri last summer, but her voice faltered. "There was an accident, cave-in, 3 months ago." Ethan's hand stilled on the guitar. "I'm sorry." "After the funeral, the money ran out quickly. The boarding house raised the rent, and I couldn't find work that paid enough." She stared at her hands. "By the time you found me, I'd been evicted and had sold everything except what I was wearing." "And the ring," Ethan observed quietly. Olivia's fingers touched it protectively. "It was his mother's. I couldn't part with it, even though it would have bought me food for weeks." They sat in silence as twilight deepened around them. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Loss changes you," he said. "Makes you see things differently." He hesitated, then added, "I had a wife once, Sarah, and a little girl, Emma." Olivia turned to him, surprised by this revelation. "Influenza took them both, winter of '73. I was working a cattle drive. By the time I got the telegram and made it home, they were already buried." His voice was steady, but pain shadowed his features. "Couldn't stay there after that. Spent 3 years drifting before Mason hired me." Understanding passed between them, the unspoken recognition of shared grief, of lives derailed by tragedy. "Does it get easier?" Olivia asked softly. Ethan considered her question carefully. "Not easier, different. You build a life around the empty space." He looked at her directly. "But you can build something good, Olivia. Something worth living for." His use of her first name felt intimate in the gathering darkness. For a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he began playing again, a gentler tune this time. They sat side by side until the stars emerged, the music weaving a temporary shelter around them against the vastness of their losses. As November yielded to December, Wyoming's brutal winter descended in earnest. The ranch became isolated by heavy snowfall, the days shortened, and everyone's work centered around survival, keeping livestock fed and watered, maintaining enough firewood, preserving food stores. Olivia proved her worth during this difficult time. Her resourcefulness impressed even Mason, who grudgingly admitted she was earning her keep and then some. She stretched food supplies with creative cooking, organized a system for the ranch hands to rotate bringing in firewood and ice from the frozen creek, and still found time to prepare small Christmas gifts for everyone. Knitted scarves and mittens made from yarn Mrs. Hoffman had found in the attic. Her friendship with Ethan deepened through those cold, dark weeks. They established a routine of evening visits. Sometimes he'd bring his guitar, other times they'd just talk or sit in comfortable silence while she mended and he whittled. He taught her to play checkers, and she shared stories from the books she read from Mason's library. Olivia tried to ignore the warmth that spread through her whenever he was near, the way her heart quickened at his approach. Such feelings seemed a betrayal of James, whose memory remained a bittersweet presence in her thoughts. Yet she couldn't deny the slow awakening within her, the realization that her heart hadn't died with her husband. Christmas Eve brought a temporary respite from the harsh winter. Mrs. Hoffman and Olivia prepared a feast, and Mason opened his rarely used dining room to all the ranch hands. They ate and sang carols, and for a few hours, the isolation of winter receded in the face of companionship. Ethan found Olivia alone in the kitchen afterward, washing the last of the dishes. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Thought you might like to open it tonight rather than tomorrow with everyone watching." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of red yarn. Olivia dried her hands and accepted it carefully. "You didn't need to get me anything," she protested. "Wanted to," he replied simply. Inside the paper was a small wooden box, its surface polished to a soft glow. When she opened it, a delicate melody played a tiny music box. "Ethan," she breathed, touching the intricate carving on the lid, a detailed scene of mountains and pines. "It's beautiful," made the box, he explained. "Ordered the mechanism from back east months ago for another project. Thought it suited you better." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "Just wanted to see you smile." Impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, truly." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. For a breathless moment, Olivia thought he might kiss her, but then voices approached from the dining room, breaking the spell. "Merry Christmas, Olivia," Ethan said softly, stepping back. "Merry Christmas, Ethan," she replied, clutching the music box to her chest as he turned to leave. That night, alone in her cabin, she placed the music box on her small table and opened it again and again, listening to the sweet melody until she fell asleep. In her dreams, she danced with a shadowy figure who sometimes had James's face and sometimes Ethan's, and she woke feeling both guilty and strangely hopeful. January brought the hardest weeks of winter, with temperatures so low that the ranch hands took turns checking the livestock through the night to prevent freezing deaths. Olivia worried about Ethan during his overnight shifts, preparing extra coffee and hot food for him, wrapping bricks heated in the oven for him to take to the barn. Her concern didn't go unnoticed. One particularly bitter morning, Mrs. Hoffman gave Olivia a knowing look as she prepared a special breakfast for Ethan's return from the barn. "He's a good man," the older woman said carefully, "been alone too long." Olivia busied herself with the stove. "We're friends, he's been kind to me." "Kindness is a fine foundation, Mrs. Hoffman observed. "Better than passion alone, which burns out quick as kindling." She patted Olivia's arm. Just remember, dear, being faithful to a memory isn't the same as being faithful to a man. Your James wouldn't want you to freeze your heart forever." Before Olivia could respond, Ethan entered, stamping snow from his boots. His face was red with cold, his beard frosted, but he smiled warmly at the sight of her. "Coffee smells like heaven," he said, removing his heavy coat. "Thought I might never feel my toes again." Olivia poured him a steaming cup, noticing how her hands trembled slightly. Mrs. Hoffman's words echoed in her mind as she watched Ethan warm himself by the stove, his strong profile illuminated by the firelight. Later that day, disaster struck. One of the young ranch hands, barely 18, didn't return from checking fence lines. Mason organized a search party with strict instructions to travel in pairs and carry emergency supplies. Ethan prepared to join the search, layering clothes and packing his saddlebags with blankets and food. Olivia helped him, her movements efficient but her eyes betraying her fear. "I'll be careful," he promised, reading her concern. "Probably just lost track of time or his horse came up lame." "Take these," she said, pressing extra socks and mittens into his hands. "And promise you'll turn back before dark." "Can't promise that," he said honestly. "Not if the boy's still out there." Olivia nodded, understanding but hating it nonetheless. "Then promise you'll come back." Their eyes locked and Ethan's expression softened. Gently, he touched her cheek with a gloved hand. "I promise." The hours of waiting were excruciating. Olivia kept busy, preparing food for the returning search parties, heating water for coffee and tea, trying not to look at the clock or the darkening sky outside the windows. It was well after midnight when hoofbeats announced the final party's return. Olivia rushed to the door, her heart in her throat. Ethan dismounted slowly, exhaustion evident in every movement. Behind him, two other men carefully lowered a still form from a horse. "Is he?" Olivia couldn't finish the question. "Alive," Ethan confirmed grimly. "But barely. Found him half buried in snow, horse must have thrown him. He's got a broken leg and he's frozen nearly through." The next hours were a blur of activity. The injured boy, Billy Thompson, was brought into the main house, where Mrs. Hoffman and Olivia worked to warm him gradually, while Mason's son rode for the doctor in Jackson. Ethan stayed by the boy's side, his own exhaustion forgotten as he helped change cold compresses for warm ones, spoon broth between blue lips, monitor for signs of improvement or decline. Dawn was breaking when the doctor finally arrived. By then, Billy's color had improved slightly, though he remained unconscious. The doctor set his broken leg, left medicines and instructions, and warned that the next 24 hours would determine whether the young man would survive. Only after the doctor departed did Ethan allow Olivia to lead him to a spare bedroom. "You need rest," she insisted, helping him remove his boots. "You've done all you can." "He's just a kid," Ethan murmured, his voice rough with fatigue. "Shouldn't have been out alone." "You saved his life," Olivia reminded him, pulling a blanket over his shoulders. "Rest now." As she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. "Stay," he whispered, "just until I fall asleep." Olivia hesitated only briefly before sitting on the edge of the bed. Ethan's eyes were already closing, his breathing slowing. Tentatively, she stroked his hair back from his forehead, a gesture of comfort she'd once used with James during his illnesses. "Thank you for coming back," she said softly, not sure if he was still awake to hear her. His fingers tightened slightly around hers before sleep claimed him completely. Billy Thompson survived his ordeal, though his recovery was slow. Olivia took on much of his care, reading to him during long afternoons while his leg healed, teaching him to play checkers when boredom made him restless. He reminded her of her younger brother, left behind in Missouri, and caring for him gave her a sense of purpose beyond her daily duties. The incident brought Olivia and Ethan closer. Something had shifted between them during that long night of waiting, and worry and unspoken acknowledgement that they had become important to each other in ways that transcended friendship. February brought Valentine's Day and an unexpected thaw that allowed for a trip into Jackson. Mason needed supplies, and Mrs. Hoffman had a long list of household items. Ethan volunteered to drive the wagon and, to Olivia's surprise, asked if she would accompany him. "Thought you might like to see something besides the ranch," he explained when she hesitated. "Mrs. Hoffman says you need fabric for new dresses, and Mason's given permission." The journey into town was Olivia's first time away from the ranch since her arrival. She felt a flutter of anxiety as Jackson came into view, the same streets where she'd experienced such desperate poverty just months before. But with Ethan beside her, the town seemed different, less threatening. They completed their errands efficiently, with Ethan insisting on carrying her packages and helping her select fabric for new clothes. As they were loading the wagon for the return trip, he suggested they stop for lunch at the hotel restaurant, a luxury Olivia hadn't experienced since before James's death. The dining room was modestly elegant, with white tablecloths and real silver. Olivia felt self-conscious in her simple dress, but Ethan seemed perfectly at ease, pulling out her chair and ordering for both of them with quiet confidence. "This feels like another life," she confessed, looking around at the other diners. "Before everything happened, James and I dined here once. It was our anniversary." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "First time I took Sarah to a real restaurant, I was so nervous I knocked over an entire water pitcher, soaked the tablecloth, her dress, everything." He smiled at the memory. "She laughed so hard the manager asked us to leave." Olivia found herself laughing too, delighted by this glimpse into his past. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Ethan agreed, his expression softening, "and she would have liked you." Their eyes met across the table, and Olivia felt a rush of emotion, not just attraction, but something deeper, a sense of connection that both honored their pasts and hinted at a possible future. After lunch, Ethan surprised her with one more stop, the small jewelry store on the corner of Main Street. Inside, he asked to see a display of hairpins. "Your birthday's coming up, isn't it?" he asked, referring to a date she'd mentioned casually weeks before. "Thought you might like something pretty." Olivia protested that it was unnecessary, but Ethan insisted she choose something. Finally, she selected a simple silver pin with a small pearl. "It reminds me of my mother's," she explained as they left the shop. She had one similar that she wore on special occasions. Ethan tucked the small package into his pocket. "Then I chose well," he said, helping her into the wagon. On the journey back to the ranch, they talked more freely than they ever had before. Ethan shared stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his brief time in the Union Army during the final months of the Civil War, his dreams of someday owning his own ranch. Olivia told him about growing up on her family's struggling farm, her brief education in a one-room schoolhouse, her courtship with James, who had worked as a clerk in her father's general store. By the time they reached the Rockingham, something fundamental had changed between them. The careful distance they'd maintained had dissolved, replaced by a tender familiarity that made Olivia's heart both lighter and more vulnerable than it had been in months. That night, after everyone else had retired, Ethan walked her to her cabin as usual. But instead of bidding her good night at the door, he lingered. "I've been wanting to ask you something," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "but I wasn't sure if it was too soon." Olivia's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Would you allow me to court you properly, Olivia? I know you're still wearing James's ring, and I respect that. I'm not asking you to forget him, just to consider that there might be room in your heart for someone else too." The directness of his request took her breath away. Olivia looked down at the gold band on her finger, the tangible reminder of a love that had defined her early adulthood, a commitment she'd thought would last a lifetime. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, accepting her honesty without resentment. "I understand, and I'll wait however long you need." He reached out slowly and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Just know that if you are ready, I'll be here." He lifted her hand to his lips and placed a gentle kiss on her knuckles, then released her and stepped back. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. Inside her cabin, Olivia lit the lamp and sat at her small table, turning her wedding ring on her finger. For the first time since James's death, she carefully removed it and held it in her palm, studying the simple gold band in the lamplight. The ring represented promises made and a life cut short, love and loss intertwined. But it also represented the past, a chapter of her life that had ended tragically but irrevocably. Ahead of her stretched unknown pages, blank and waiting. With careful movements, Olivia opened Ethan's music box and placed the ring inside. The melody played softly as she closed the lid, sealing away not her memories or her love for James, but the binding power they had held over her future. When she blew out the lamp and climbed into bed, her finger felt strange without the familiar weight of the ring. But her heart felt lighter, as if by acknowledging the possibility of new love, she had released herself from a prison of grief she hadn't fully recognized. Spring came to Wyoming with dramatic suddenness. One week, snow still covered the ground. The next, green shoots appeared and the creek ran high with melting runoff from the mountains. The ranch bustled with activity. Fences needed repair after winter damage, newborn calves required attention, and preparations began for the summer cattle drive. Olivia and Ethan's courtship progressed with the changing season. It began with small gestures: wildflowers left on her doorstep, walks along the creek on Sunday afternoons, an exchange of books they'd enjoyed. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond shared grief to dreams, beliefs, hopes for the future. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Good-natured teasing followed Ethan when Olivia wasn't present, but it was tempered with genuine approval. She had become a valued member of the ranch community, and Ethan was well respected. Even Mason seemed pleased, commenting gruffly that Quinn's finally showing some sense, settling down with a good woman. By late April, when the days lengthened and wildflowers carpeted the meadows, Ethan began teaching Olivia to ride. She'd had some experience on her family's farm, but had never been comfortable on horseback. With patient instruction, he helped her overcome her nervousness, starting with gentle mounts and short distances. On a particularly beautiful Saturday, Ethan suggested they pack a picnic and ride to his favorite spot in the foothills. Olivia, now confident enough to handle her mare independently, agreed eagerly. The location he chose took her breath away: a small clearing overlooking a valley, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. A stream tumbled nearby, providing a soothing backdrop of sound. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Olivia said as Ethan spread a blanket on the grass. "I found this place my first summer here," he told her, unpacking the food Mrs. Hoffman had prepared. "Used to come up here to think, especially those first years after Sarah and Emma died. Somehow, the vastness of it all put my troubles in perspective." They ate leisurely, talking and laughing, occasionally lapsing into comfortable silence to enjoy the view. When the meal was finished, Ethan reached into his saddlebag and produced a small box wrapped in blue paper. "Happy birthday," he said, handing it to her. Olivia had almost forgotten the date. "You remembered." "Of course I did." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Been planning this for weeks." Inside the box was the silver hairpin she'd admired in Jackson, but it had been modified: the simple pearl now surrounded by tiny blue forget-me-nots crafted from enamel. "Ethan," she breathed, touching the delicate flowers. "It's exquisite. How did you?" "Sent it back east to a jeweler Mason knows," he explained. "Thought it needed something special like you." Olivia carefully pinned it into her hair, then leaned over and kissed Ethan's cheek, their first such contact beyond holding hands. "Thank you, I'll treasure it always." Ethan's expression grew serious as he caught her hand in his. "Olivia, these past months have been the happiest I've known in years. Being with you, it's like finding something I didn't even know I was missing." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his voice. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "You've brought me back to life, Ethan. When you found me by that campfire, I thought everything was over, but you were right, I still belonged somewhere. Here with you." Ethan's smile illuminated his entire face. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a first exploration rather than a demand. When they parted, Olivia felt a wonderful lightness, as if some final weight had lifted from her shoulders. She smiled and moved closer to Ethan on the blanket, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains. "I love you, Olivia," he said simply, his arm around her waist. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both new and perfectly natural on her lips. They rode back to the ranch as twilight gathered, hands occasionally reaching across the space between their horses, both changed by the words they had finally spoken aloud. The following weeks brought new challenges. The annual cattle drive was approaching, and Ethan would be gone for nearly 2 months, traveling with the herd to the railroad in Cheyenne. The prospect of such a long separation so soon after acknowledging their feelings was difficult for both of them. "I've been thinking," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch of her cabin, "about what happens when I get back from the drive." Olivia set aside her mending. "What do you mean?" "I mean us, our future." He turned to face her directly. "I know it's sudden, and if you need more time, I understand, but I want to marry you, Olivia, build a life together." Though she'd begun to hope for this, the actual proposal still took her breath away. "Are you certain? It's only been—" "I'm certain," he interrupted gently. "Have been since that day in town, just didn't want to rush you." Olivia's mind raced. Marriage meant a complete new beginning, a commitment to building a life with Ethan. It meant fully embracing the future instead of dwelling in the past. "Where would we live?" she asked practically. Ethan smiled, seeming encouraged by her question. "I've been saving to buy land of my own. Mason's got a parcel he's willing to sell me about 15 miles north of here with good water and decent grazing. There's a small cabin that needs work, but we could expand it over time." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, starting over completely, building something together from the ground up. "It won't be easy," Ethan continued, reading her expression. "At least not at first, but we'd be together, making our own way. And I promise you, Olivia, I'll work every day to make you happy." Olivia reached for his hand, her decision made. "Yes, yes," Ethan repeated, his face lighting up. "Yes, I'll marry you," she confirmed, her own smile matching his, "when you return from the drive. We can start our life together then." Ethan swept her into his arms, lifting her off the porch in his excitement. Their laughter mingled in the evening air, a joyful sound that drew curious glances from the bunkhouse. The next morning, they shared their news with Mrs. Hoffman and Mason. The older woman embraced Olivia tearfully, declaring she'd known all along they were meant for each other. Mason offered gruff congratulations, and to their surprise, a wedding gift. He would sell Ethan the land at half its value and provide lumber from the ranch's woodlot for expanding the cabin. "Been watching you too," he explained when Ethan protested such generosity. "Reminds me of me and the missus when we were young. Besides, rather have good neighbors than strangers moving in." The weeks before the cattle drive passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Ethan spent every spare moment at their property, making the cabin weathertight and planning improvements for when he returned. Olivia continued her duties at the ranch, but began setting aside household items for their future home: linens, cookware, the small treasures that would make it truly theirs. The night before Ethan's departure arrived too quickly. They sat on the porch of her cabin under a star-filled sky, neither wanting to speak the farewell that loomed at dawn. 2 months isn't so long, Ethan said, attempting optimism. "You'll be so busy getting ready for the wedding, I'll be back before you know it." Olivia nodded, trying to match his tone. "Mrs. Hoffman's already planning the menu, and she's insisting on helping me make a proper wedding dress." But beneath their practical conversation ran a current of anxiety. Cattle drives were dangerous river crossings, stampedes, bandits, unpredictable weather. Many men didn't return, a reality neither wanted to acknowledge directly. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a simple gold ring. "It was my grandmother's. I want you to have it now before I go. A promise." Gently, he slid the ring onto Olivia's finger, the same one that had once held James's band. It fit perfectly, as if meant to be there. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears threatening despite her determination to be brave. "When I get back," Ethan said, his voice husky with emotion, "we'll make it official. Preacher Jackson from town has already agreed to come out for the ceremony." Olivia touched his face, memorizing every feature. "Just come back to me, that's all that matters." Their goodbye kiss was deep and desperate, laden with words unsaid and feelings too immense for language. When they finally parted, both were trembling. "I love you," Ethan said, pressing his forehead to hers. "Remember that every day I'm gone." "I love you too," Olivia replied. "And I'll be here waiting, no matter what." Dawn came too soon. Olivia stood with Mrs. Hoffman, watching as the men departed with the herd, over 2,000 cattle heading east in a cloud of dust. Ethan turned in his saddle for one last look, raising his hand in farewell before the distance swallowed him. 2 months stretched before her like an eternity. The first weeks of Ethan's absence passed slowly, despite Olivia's busy schedule. She threw herself into preparations for their future, sewing curtains for the cabin, preparing preserves from the garden's early produce, learning from Mrs. Hoffman recipes that had been Ethan's favorites since childhood. On Sundays, when her duties were lighter, she rode out to their property alone. The cabin stood empty but full of promise. Ethan had left his mark everywhere, from the newly shingled roof to the vegetable garden he'd started behind the house. Olivia would spend hours there, sweeping floors, arranging and rearranging the few pieces of furniture they'd acquired, imagining their life together. Letters arrived sporadically from points along the cattle drive route. Ethan's handwriting was cramped but legible, his words simple but heartfelt. He wrote of missing her, of thinking about their future during long nights watching the herd, of plans for improving their land once they were married. Olivia read each letter until the paper grew soft from handling, then carefully tied them with ribbon and kept them in Ethan's music box alongside James's ring past and future nestled together, no longer in conflict. June brought unseasonably heavy rains to Wyoming. The creek swelled beyond its banks, fields turned to mud, and everyone at the ranch worked double shifts to prevent flooding in the barns and outbuildings. Olivia worried about conditions on the trail, knowing how dangerous river crossings could be with high water. In mid-June, a rider arrived from the east, mud-spattered and exhausted. He brought news from the drive a flash flood had swept away part of the herd at a river crossing. 2 men were missing. Olivia's heart nearly stopped until the rider continued the missing men had been found downriver, battered but alive. The herd had suffered losses, but the drive was continuing. Ethan's name wasn't mentioned, which Olivia took as good news. Still, the incident underscored the dangers he faced daily, and her anxiety increased. She found herself checking the horizon constantly, as if by sheer will she could make him appear. July brought scorching heat and the promise of Ethan's return. According to his last letter, the drive had reached Cheyenne. The cattle had been sold at good prices, and the men were preparing for the journey home. If all went well, they would reach the Rockingham by mid-month. Olivia's wedding dress was finished, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored cotton with lace that Mrs. Hoffman had saved from her own daughter's wedding. The cabin was ready, freshly whitewashed inside and filled with the essentials for starting their life together. All that remained was for Ethan to return. On July 12th, Olivia was in the kitchen with Mrs. Hoffman when they heard hoofbeats approaching. She rushed to the window, her heart pounding, but it wasn't the returning cowboys, just a single rider she didn't recognize. The stranger asked for Mason, and they were closeted in his study for nearly an hour. When Mason finally emerged, his face was grim. "Mrs. Benton," he said formally, I need to speak with you." The world seemed to tilt beneath Olivia's feet as she followed Mason back to his study. The stranger stood as she entered, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a travel-worn appearance. "This is Marshall Dawson from Cheyenne," Mason explained. "He's brought news about the drive." The marshal removed his hat, his expression somber. "Madam, I'm afraid there was an incident after the cattle were sold. A dispute in one of the saloons got out of hand. Shots were fired." Olivia gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white. "Ethan, Mr. Quinn was hit," the marshal confirmed. "He was trying to break up the fight from all accounts, not involved in the original dispute." "Is he?" Olivia couldn't finish the question, terror closing her throat. "He's alive," the marshal hastened to add, "but seriously wounded. The doctor in Cheyenne is caring for him." "He asked me to deliver this." He reached into his coat and extracted a folded letter, slightly blood-stained at one corner. With trembling hands, Olivia accepted the letter. Ethan's handwriting was shaky but recognizable. "My dearest Olivia," it began, "by now you know what's happened. The doctor says I'm lucky the bullet missed my heart by inches, but I won't be riding home with the others. It'll be weeks before I can travel, maybe longer." Tears blurred her vision as she continued reading. "I'm sorry to delay our plans, but I promise you, as soon as I'm able, I'll come home to you. Don't worry about me, just know that thoughts of you and our future together are keeping me fighting. All my love, Ethan." Olivia looked up from the letter, her decision already made. "I need to go to him." Mason started to protest, citing the dangers and difficulties of such a journey, but Olivia cut him off with uncharacteristic firmness. "He needs me, and I'm going. The only question is how." After a moment of consideration, Mason nodded. "The stage runs to Cheyenne twice weekly. Marshal Dawson can escort you on his return trip." "I'd be honored, madam," the marshal agreed. "We can leave tomorrow morning if that suits." "Yes," Olivia said, clutching Ethan's letter to her chest. "I'll be ready at first light." The journey to Cheyenne was grueling, 3 days of jolting travel over rough roads, with nights spent in crude way stations. But Olivia barely noticed the discomfort. Her thoughts focused entirely on reaching Ethan. Marshal Dawson proved a respectful and helpful companion, sharing what he knew of Ethan's condition and arranging accommodations at each stop. By the time they reached Cheyenne, Olivia was exhausted but determined. The town was larger and more developed than Jackson, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and the constant noise of the railroad. Marshal Dawson took Olivia directly to the doctor's residence, where Ethan was recovering in a back bedroom. "He's been asking for you," the doctor's wife told her kindly. "Fever broke yesterday, thank the Lord. First thing he said when he was lucid was your name." Steeling herself, Olivia entered the sickroom. The sight of Ethan pale against the white sheets, his strong frame diminished by injury, nearly broke her composure. But when he turned his head and saw her, the joy that transformed his face gave her strength. "Olivia," he whispered, reaching out a weakened hand. "You came." She crossed the room and carefully sat beside him on the bed, taking his hand in both of hers. "Of course I came. Did you think I wouldn't?" "Hoped you would," he admitted, his voice raspy. "Didn't want to ask it of you. The journey's not easy." "Nothing about our journey has been easy," she reminded him, gently stroking his hair back from his forehead. "But we're making it together, remember?" Ethan's smile was tired but genuine. "Together," he agreed. "I'm sorry about the wedding." "Hush," she interrupted. "The wedding can wait. Getting you well is what matters now." The doctor entered then, introducing himself and explaining Ethan's condition. The bullet had entered his left shoulder, narrowly missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss and trauma. Infection had set in initially, resulting in fever, but was now responding to treatment. "He'll recover," the doctor assured Olivia, "but it will take time. 6 to 8 weeks before he's strong enough for the journey home, I'd estimate." Olivia nodded, her decision already made. "Then I'll stay until he's ready." Over the next days, she established a routine. Mornings were spent helping the doctor's wife with household tasks in exchange for room and board. Afternoons and evenings belonged to Ethan reading to him, helping him with exercises to regain strength, simply sitting with him as he rested. The doctor's wife, Clara, became a friend and ally. When Olivia mentioned their delayed wedding plans, Clara suggested a solution. Why wait? She asked practically. Pastor Miller from our church visits Ethan regularly. He could marry you here once Ethan's a bit stronger. The idea took root. When Olivia proposed it to Ethan, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. Nothing would make me happier, he said. I've waited a lifetime for you, Olivia. Don't want to wait a day longer than necessary. And so, on a warm August afternoon, with Ethan propped up in bed and Clara and the doctor serving as witnesses, Pastor Miller performed a simple ceremony in the sick room. Olivia wore her best traveling dress, her hair pinned with Ethan's birthday gift. Ethan managed to sit up, though he tired quickly, his injured arm supported in a sling. Their vows were traditional but spoken with deep conviction. When Ethan slid his grandmother's ring, which Olivia had removed for the ceremony, back onto her finger, his hands were steady despite his weakness. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Pastor Miller declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Their first kiss as a married couple was gentle, mindful of Ethan's condition, but filled with promise. Clara dabbed at her eyes while the doctor poured small glasses of sherry for a toast. To new beginnings, he proposed, raising his glass. And to coming home, Ethan added, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face. That night, Clara prepared a special dinner which they ate in Ethan's room. Afterward, despite the doctor's concerns about Ethan overtaxing his strength, he insisted that they should have time alone as newlyweds. When everyone had retired, Olivia carefully lay down beside Ethan on the narrow bed, mindful of his injury. He drew her close with his good arm, and they talked quietly into the night, not of the past or the difficulties that had brought them to this moment, but of the future they would build together when they returned home. Recovery was slow but steady. By September, Ethan was able to leave his bed for short periods, then progressed to walking in the garden behind the doctor's house. Olivia was his constant companion, supporting him physically and spiritually through the frustrations of convalescence. Their time in Cheyenne, though born of tragedy, became precious to them, both a period of deepening knowledge and growing intimacy, without the distractions of daily work. They talked for hours, sharing childhood memories, hopes, fears, establishing the foundation of understanding that would sustain their marriage. Finally, in early October, the doctor declared Ethan strong enough to travel. The journey would need to be broken into stages, with rest days between, but with proper care, he could safely return to Jackson. They departed Cheyenne with heartfelt thanks to the doctor and Clara, whose kindness had made their extended stay not just bearable but meaningful. The return journey was slow, first by train as far as the rails extended, then by stagecoach for the remainder of the distance. Olivia watched the landscape change as they traveled west, the open plains giving way to rolling hills, then the dramatic backdrop of mountains. Wyoming in autumn was spectacular, the aspen trees flaring gold against the dark green of pines. When they finally crested the rise overlooking Jackson, both fell silent. The town looked unchanged, yet everything was different. They were returning not as individuals but as a married couple, their lives irrevocably entwined. Almost home, Ethan murmured, squeezing Olivia's hand. She smiled, recognizing the broader truth in his words. Home was no longer a place to her, it was wherever they were together. Their return to the Rocking M was met with celebration. Mrs. Hoffman cried happy tears. Mason clapped Ethan carefully on his good shoulder, and the ranch hands organized an impromptu party to honor both Ethan's recovery and their marriage. But amid the welcome, both Olivia and Ethan felt the pull of their own place. After 2 days of rest and reunion, they announced their intention to move to the cabin. "You sure you're strong enough?" Mason questioned Ethan. "Winter's coming on, might be wiser to stay here until spring." "We've waited long enough," Ethan replied firmly. "Besides, the cabin's sound and we've got supplies laid by. We'll manage." Olivia supported his decision completely. Though grateful for the ranch's hospitality, she longed for privacy and the chance to establish their own household. The thought of facing winter in their small cabin was daunting, but they would face it together as they had faced everything else. The day of their departure dawned clear and cool. Mason provided a wagon for their belongings, which had grown considerably thanks to wedding gifts from the ranch community quilts, preserved foods, tools, even a milk cow from Mason himself. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Hoffman pressed a final package into Olivia's hands. "A little something to remember us by," she said, embracing Olivia warmly. "You've become like a daughter to me." Inside the package was a framed sampler, clearly Mrs. Hoffman's own work. The stitched words read, "Home is where love resides, memories are created, friends are always welcome, and laughter never ends." "It's perfect," Olivia said, blinking back tears. "Thank you for everything." Their arrival at the cabin, their home, felt momentous. Ethan insisted on carrying Olivia across the threshold despite his still healing shoulder, and they stood together in the main room, taking in the simple space that was now theirs entirely. Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine that accommodated Ethan's continuing recovery. Mornings, Olivia tended the garden and animals while Ethan worked on smaller tasks within his capability. Afternoons, they often worked together on home improvements, hanging curtains Olivia had sewn, building shelves for their growing collection of books, planning additions to the cabin for future needs. Evenings were their favorite time. After supper, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes just talking, planning, dreaming. These quiet hours became precious, a daily affirmation of the bond that had grown between them through hardship and joy. Winter arrived with its usual Wyoming ferocity, deep snow and temperatures that plummeted well below freezing. But inside their cabin, Olivia and Ethan had created a haven of warmth and love. The long nights gave them time for storytelling and music, for learning the rhythms of shared life, for discussing hopes for the future. One particularly brutal January evening, a blizzard howled around their small home. They had prepared well. The woodpile was stacked high, the pantry well stocked, the livestock secured in the small barn Ethan had built with help from the Rocking M hands. As they sat by the fire after dinner, Ethan put aside the harness he was mending and looked at Olivia thoughtfully. "Remember when we first met?" he asked, his voice soft against the wind's wail. Olivia smiled, setting down her knitting. "How could I forget? I was certain I'd reached the end of everything. Then you appeared like some guardian angel with bread and cheese. You looked so lost," Ethan recalled. "But underneath, I could see such strength. Knew it then that you were someone special." "I thought you were just being kind," Olivia admitted. "Didn't realize you were changing my entire life." Ethan reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the wedding ring he'd placed there. "Mine too. After Sarah and Emma died, I never thought I'd have a family again, never thought I'd want one." Olivia moved to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. "And now I want everything with you," he said simply. "A life, children, growing old together in this place we're building." Olivia's heart swelled with love and a joy so intense it almost hurt. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. "I've suspected for a few weeks, but now I'm certain." Ethan turned to look at her, his expression curious. "We're going to have a baby," Olivia said, watching his face carefully. "In early summer, the doctor thinks." For a moment, Ethan seemed frozen in place. Then his eyes filled with tears and he gathered her gently into his arms. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." The wonder in his voice was everything Olivia had hoped for. They sat entwined before the fire, making plans and sharing dreams as the storm raged outside, powerless against the warmth they had created together. Spring came slowly that year, reluctantly yielding winter's grip on the land. As the snow receded and green began to return to the valley, Ethan's strength fully returned as well. With renewed vigor, he set about expanding their cabin to accommodate their growing family, adding a proper bedroom and enlarging the main living area. Olivia bloomed with her pregnancy, her natural resilience serving her well as her body changed. She planted an expanded garden, began a small orchard with saplings purchased from a traveling nursery man, and set up a chicken coop with hens acquired from a neighboring ranch. Their nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, became friends and regular visitors. Martha Johnson, a mother of 4, provided Olivia with practical advice about childbirth and infant care, while her husband Samuel helped Ethan with larger projects around the homestead. By June, their place had transformed from a simple cabin to a proper small farm. They had 6 milk cows, 2 dozen chickens, a vegetable garden that promised abundant harvest, and a home that, while still modest, reflected their shared vision and hard work. As Olivia's time drew near, Martha Johnson came to stay, her experienced presence a comfort to both expectant parents. Ethan had arranged for the doctor from Jackson to visit weekly, though the distance meant that Martha would likely attend the actual birth. The baby arrived on a perfect summer morning, June 17, 1879, almost exactly a year after Ethan's injury in Cheyenne. After a night of labor during which Ethan never left Olivia's side, their son was born as dawn broke over the mountains. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with a mixture of awe and terror. "Look what we did, Olivia." Exhausted but radiant, Olivia watched her husband hold their child. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on any. Now, looking at the infant's shock of dark hair and solemn expression, Ethan suggested, "What about James? To honor your first husband." Olivia's eyes filled with grateful tears at this generous gesture. "James Ethan Quinn," she said, testing the name. "It's perfect." As summer progressed into fall, their life settled into a new rhythm dictated by little James's needs. The baby thrived, growing stronger daily, his personality emerging curious, determined, quick to smile. Ethan proved an attentive father, often carrying James in a sling while he worked around the farm, talking to him constantly about everything from cattle breeding to carpentry. The 1-year anniversary of their wedding passed quietly, marked by a special dinner and an exchange of simple gifts, a hand-carved jewelry box from Ethan to Olivia, a new shirt she had sewn for him in secret moments while he was working outside. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Quinn," Ethan said as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, James asleep in his cradle beside them. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Quinn," Olivia replied, leaning against his shoulder. "It's been quite a year." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "First of many," he promised. "Each one better than the last." As darkness settled over their homestead and stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here from desperate poverty and solitude to abundance and love. She remembered that cold night by the dying campfire when she had truly believed she had nothing left, and how a stranger's simple act of kindness had changed everything. "You still belong here," Ethan had told her then, offering bread and hope in equal measure. He had been right, though neither of them could have imagined just how true those words would prove to be. Years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Their family grew. A daughter, Sarah, joined them 2 years after James, followed by twins William and Elizabeth 3 years later. The farm prospered, expanding to include more livestock and fields of wheat and corn. Ethan's careful management and Olivia's tireless work transformed their modest homestead into one of the most productive in the county. The cabin evolved too, becoming a proper house with multiple bedrooms, a spacious kitchen where Olivia taught her daughters to cook, and a covered porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Ethan built a separate workshop where he crafted furniture during winter months when farm work slowed, developing a reputation for quality that brought commissions from as far away as Cheyenne. Their children grew strong and capable in the Wyoming wilderness, each developing distinct personalities that delighted their parents. James, the eldest, showed Ethan's quiet steadiness and love of the land. Sarah inherited Olivia's gentle spirit but combined it with a fierce independence. The twins complemented each other perfectly. William the dreamer, always with his nose in a book, and Elizabeth the practical one who could ride and rope as well as any boy in the county. Through it all, the bond between Ethan and Olivia only deepened. Their shared experiences, the joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges of building a life together, had forged a connection that withstood every test. They still talked long into the night, still found reasons to laugh together daily, still looked at each other with the mixture of love and wonder that had characterized their early relationship. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children nearly grown, Ethan surprised Olivia with a trip, a 2-week journey to San Francisco, something she had always dreamed of but never expected to experience. "You've earned this," he told her as they prepared to depart, leaving the farm in James's capable hands. 20 years of hard work, 4 children raised right, and making me the happiest man in Wyoming every single day. The trip was everything Olivia had imagined: the marvel of the ocean, which she had never seen, the sophistication of city life, experiences that expanded her world beyond the boundaries of their ranch. But by the end, she was eager to return home, to the life they had built together. As their train crossed back into Wyoming, Ethan took her hand. "Regret coming back?" he asked, a hint of insecurity in his voice. Olivia squeezed his fingers reassuringly. "Not for a moment. San Francisco was wonderful, but it isn't home." "And where is home, Mrs. Quinn?" Ethan teased, though his eyes were serious. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, her answer both simple and profound. "Wherever you are," she said, "that's where I belong." The train carried them westward through the gathering dusk, toward the mountains that cradled their valley, toward the children waiting to welcome them. Toward the future they continued to build together one day at a time, with love as their foundation and faith as their guide. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done, and they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, Ethan still sometimes brought Olivia bread fresh from the oven, a simple gesture that reminded them both of their beginning of a cold night by a dying fire when hope was rekindled with a single act of kindness, and 2 broken hearts found their way to healing in each other's company. "You still belong here," he would say, placing the bread in her hands. And Olivia, surrounded by the life they had created together, would smile and know it was true.